Welcome back to What Is Episode 1. In our last session in this episode, my dad covered how we cannot conclude that the prehistoric times were fact, but that the prehistoric times were a theory. We also covered carbon-14 dating and how carbon content in the atmosphere is constantly changing. And yes, many of you noticed our special edition episode on moral code. In that, we discussed a topic away from the subject of science and explained the different moral codes of the Republican and Democrat agenda around the election and up to now. If you have not watched the video, we highly suggest that you do after this session. Today, in part 2 of our first episode for What Is, we will discuss assumptions, geological columns, and putting faith in what you believe to be true.
Howdy, welcome back to What Is Episode 1, Part 2 of What Is Prehistoric. I had a couple questions I had in my mind lately, and it's like, here's a rock pulled by a river, and according to the general idea, theories behind geologists today, this river is going to cut this canyon, it's going to make a gigantic canyon, and it's going to just totally erode this land away, and over billions of years, this will look nothing like it did right now. And over here, we've got a geologic column that supposedly, across the entire world, that geologic column is the same. You'll find the same bits and pieces and fragments of animals in the different geologic columns. Okay, as a novice, or as a person who doesn't know much about geology, other than what I've read, I really can't tell you much about where they came up with their ideas. I have an idea where they came up with their ideas, but what I can tell you is this is a rock. This rock is probably made from calcification and some water, maybe some carbonic acid erosion or whatever. What I do know about this rock is I can take a chip of it, I can put it through a mass spectrometer, and I can tell you what elements are in it. I can probably even get you radiation indication, tells you what radiation it's giving off, because everything gives off a certain amount of natural radiation, especially radon. I can tell you how much it weighs. I can tell you what would happen if a bullet went through it, because of certain types of materials in it. But that's all I can tell you. Where it's been, how it got where it did. I just moved it, so now it's over there. So like say if it gets stuck somewhere and something dries up and it calcifies, it gets stuck. Someone's gonna say, wow, that rock got there by natural processes. Well, let's talk about radioisometric dating. First of all, it's based on 3 assumptions that I know of. Okay, first assumption, closed system. You look at this river. This is not a closed system. You look at these rocks near the river. These rocks have water erosion and water damage. They've also had water penetration. There's diffusion of gas through these rocks. I have no idea where that rock came from. I have no idea the history of that rock. I can come up with some guesses, but I don't know for sure. The geologic column? That's not proven. That's an open system. All around the world you have rocks at different levels with different types of fossils in it. There's nothing proven. They have no proof. And if they do get proof contrary to what their theories are, as far as modern day geologists, paleontologists, they don't look at it. Makes me convinced that what they're saying is all a sham, but that's just me. Look into it for yourself. So here are the 3 ideas. Closed system. If you get cops that go to an evidence scene, and they get there right away, they might be able to pick up evidence that can help them solve the crime. But if they wait a day, 10 days, a month, a year, 2 years, it gets exponentially harder to solve that crime. Now just imagine if you multiply that by 1,000 years. 2,000, 10,000, 50,000, a million years. What is that evidence going to be like, and what is it going to tell you? Well, one, you might be able to tell that this rock here has black mold on it. That's the type of black mold that's common to this river. You've got moss, you've got some iron deposits. You don't know how they got there. I don't know how it got there, and logically and physically and whatever circumstantially, people who claim to know how it got there millions of years ago, they don't really know either. What it is a really good guess, they think. It manages to fit in with everything else. The problem is if you have evidence that doesn't fit in, you don't throw it out, you try to get it to fit in. If it doesn't fit, it means your theory's wrong. So, in an open system, say the police try to arrive and try to figure out what happened, things can tamper with it. You have a flowing river, you've got animals, you've got people, you've got wind, you've got rain, you've got snow. All these things over thousands of years will do something to your evidence. Now, granted, you can tell that something's been water damaged, you can tell something's been water eroded, but you really don't know what happened to it. So that's where talk about carbon dating, or we already talked about carbon dating. Talk about radioisotopic dating. That way I can figure out what happened, or can I? Okay, so the second assumption is that you know, if I pick up this rock, now this is not the type of rock, this is not like a basalt or a type of rock that they would use for radioisometric dating. What they would do, because this got water damage, they would find a rock that was near it, because, you know, it's near it, so it's got to be evidence. Anyway, you take the rock that's near it, and you take chips out of it, and find out what kind of radioactivity it has in it. You find out what kind of radioactivity it has in it, and then you basically take those two isotopes. One is what the original isotope was, and the other is what it decays to. Radioactive isotopes have what we call a half-life. They decay via alpha, beta, neutron decay to another element. So if you can figure out how much of that stable element, like lead or whatever's left over, and you can figure out what was at the beginning, you can figure out how much time is left because of the half-life. Well, the problem is, I don't know what was in this to begin with. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to take a guess, right? Say, well, okay, naturally right now, this amount of radioactive isotope is in proportion to this element at this ratio. Basically, so we're going to take that back, and the way they do uniformitarianism is to state that nothing has changed over all these years. It's always been the same. So the saying is that the original content proportion of radioactivity to the original isotope, the final decay order, is the same ratio that it was at the beginning. They guess what it was. But you can't do that. You don't know. You weren't there. So, boom. Assumption number 2. All right. And by the way, you're thinking, well, he hasn't read all these papers, these geologic, scientific papers. Yeah, I've read quite a few of them. And they're full of assumptions and logic fallacies based on people who don't have experience with different things. For instance, ice cores. You take an ice core, they say, oh, well, each recessive black line in the ice core is another year. So they look down, they take an ice core that's 50 feet down or 100 feet down, they say, well, this ice has taken 250,000 years to get here. Okay, there's a story of a guy who went to go get some airplanes. There was World War II airplanes, I don't know if they're P-38s, but they landed in Greenland. They had emergency landing. They knew exactly where the planes were landed. So 48 years later, they went to get them. They couldn't get the planes out because they were under 200-something feet of ice. So they cut a hole down to get to the airplanes and took the airplanes out piece by piece. Now when they looked at these layers, these melts, it was only 48 years they came up with like some number like 3,300 layers. So apparently those plains have been there for 3,300 years, and they're only under 243 feet of ice. So you tell me. The other thing is that Native Americans, Native people to the Arctic Circle know how ice melts. They're the experts at ice melting. They say those black lines come from the ice thawing, melting, thawing, melting. So over one season, you can have 5 or 6, 10 number of ice melts. The people that are going to get these ice cores have no idea what they're talking about. They may think they do because they got a degree, but they don't. Talk to the local people, they know what's going on. Anyway, that's assumption number 2, is that I kind of digressed. You know what the original proportion of element to its radioactive isotope is. You don't. Period. The third assumption is that the half-life of a radioactive element is a given, that we know what the half-life is. Okay, over 200 years of study, we know what we figured out what the average half-life is. The problem is, they want us to believe that the half-life always stayed the same, except at this one event where nothing was there, and all of a sudden there was little something, and that something exploded into the entire universe. That's the one time they want us to believe that the half-life wasn't constant, because it won't fit into the equations. Well, we don't know if the half-life is constant. So that's 3 assumptions that you use to get your radioisometric dating. So when they say, this rock is 4.5 billion years old, we don't know that. It's a guess. It's a guess based on assumptions, period. The other thing I want to talk about is all sciences have to fit together. Cosmology, geology, paleontology, it all has to fit in the uniformitarian model. And when it doesn't, they don't look at it. If you write a paper and you submit it for scientific analysis from your peers, well, if you're a creation scientist, you don't have peers because they say you're not a real scientist anyway. But if you write a paper and it shows anything that goes against this model, they throw it out, they call you a creationist, and they ban you from science, from the collegiate science. You guys ever watched Around the World in 80 Days? The Scientific Academy or whatever that was in London? That's exactly the way that the American Academy of Sciences is now. They don't listen to evidence, they don't care. Someone paying down to find evidence of evolution is going to find evidence for evolution. Someone paying you to find something, you don't find it, guess what? Your research grant money goes away. So, this may just be me. I'm not buying it. Sorry, I'm not buying it. So, what I am buying is that there's a river here, and it's moving. There's rocks. We know what's in the rocks. We know what water does. It erodes. You take a sample of a rock that's been washed with water and you take it to a geologist to get it dated. Say, I can't date that. Can you find a rock that was near it? Okay, I'll find a rock that was near it. Okay, so how old do you think this fossil is? You got to put that on the report. On the, basically, you know, like when you go to a doctor's office, you fill out a form. Well, you put it on the form of the rock that you want dated about how old you think it should be. Because you found a fossil of a Ornithopithecus or something, and he's supposed to be 15 million years old. So they run the numbers through, they say, hey, guess what? Your rock is 15.75 million years old, because that's what you wanted. It's all a game. It's called it's a tautology, circular reasoning. I believe that this should be because it is. Therefore, if it isn't, it isn't. Okay, what I just said is nonsense. And nonsense is nonsense no matter who is saying it. So what I want you to do is, don't take my word for it. Look into radioisometric dating. See how it works. Listen and keep researching it. I am not lying. It is based on assumption. Different things have proven to me that it's not true. Because I look at evidence, I look at what people have written, and I believe them because they're scientists. People who have a theory, and they can test the theory. Evolution can be tested, and it's ultimately been tested to be wrong over and over again. Animals do not change into other animals, period. The way that people get to believe it is because things have happened for 4.5 billion years, or it's 15 billion years. No, that's not proven. No one's been back at that time, you can't prove it. But you can prove it wrong. You can prove it wrong with radioisotopic halos in marble. Marble's supposed to cool for a long time. That's how scientists believe. Marble cools and you get that grain because lava happened, and in the primordial earth, the marble cooled and it got that grain in it. The problem is there's radioactive isotopes in that grain that aren't supposed to be there. But scientists don't look at that because it doesn't fit with the model. You have a Texas beach or a wadi that actually had water and it washed out the rocks and it had a whole layer they hadn't seen. They found dinosaur footprints. Now, there was a special on Nova where they were interviewing the paleontologist, and he was saying, you know, if I've ever seen evidence for creation, then, you know, I would quit my job or something. He said something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically he was saying, I've never seen evidence for creation, or that we were created about 6,000 years ago. I've only ever seen evidence for evolution. So behind him are these two guys helping him with the dig. And they're looking at these footprints, and they've got human footprints embedded in the dinosaur footprints. Embedded in them. That means that the dinosaur made it in soft clay, walked on, human was walking behind them kind of like a little kid follows a big kid in the snow, because they were all trying to escape something. Now, they kept trying to get the guy's attention while he was doing the interview for Nova. He would not look at the footprints. He would not look at them. That is the way that the American Academy of Sciences is now. They will not look because they say, if you guys start putting God into our science, everything is destroyed. We cannot have you heretics putting God into our science. It's because they say heretics because evolution is a religion. You can believe it or not, but there is no evidence to prove it. The billions of years it's supposed to exist, transitional species, there'd be millions of bones everywhere. There's no transitional species ever. So, prehistoric times. I won't even get into the bone wars. You got these guys that are getting paid by the government to go find bones, right? So Native Americans have been going around these places for hundreds of years. But all of a sudden, these smart egghead guys go and find these bones right in the middle of North Dakota or South Dakota. They just find them. You know, it's not like the Native Americans had ever seen them there. So that's kind of peculiar, right? Then you pay these guys for the discovery. Did you know the Brontosaurus is a fictional animal? Fictional. Brontosaurus didn't ever exist. It was because the guy who was looking for a discovery to beat the other guy to get money from the government put together bones of an Apatosaurus and maybe a couple other reptiles and called it Brontosaurus. Brontosaurus is a fake. And you can look that up. Look it up. Don't put a dislike on this. Look it up. Don't take my word for it. Okay, so these guys in the Bone Wars getting paid to get stuff to the Smithsonian. Okay, so this guy named Glidden, he finds giant bones of this guy who's 18 feet tall. He goes and he finds giant bones. Smithsonian takes them, they disappear. So Glidden is hidden. Glidden finds, because giants don't match with what the whole uniformitarianism model is called to say exists. So, I don't know. I'm convinced that it's not true. There's so much evidence that it isn't. You just got to get your nose out of the scientific journals that are people being paid to find evolution science, and just find it yourself. Find out how radioisometric topic dating works. Find out how mass spectrometry works, how titration works. Don't settle for someone telling you. Find it out yourself. That's about all I got to say. I'm going to end it there because I'm tired of talking about this topic. There's too many people that got their heads somewhere that if they pulled it out and looked, they would see there's plenty of evidence. Plenty of evidence. And that if you want to be a Christian, or if you want to, I don't know, if you want to believe something, you should base it on evidence. You should base it on real science, not scientism, with a belief in something just because it is. To believe it is. Because you need it to believe it is. Okay? I believe in an all-powerful creator God in the sky. Some people say the magical grandfather in the sky. Problem is, I have information that you don't. I met him. I met his son. He's a pretty nice guy. He's pretty cool. Okay, if you're an atheist or whatever, I don't care. If something is going to matter to your entire life and your whole life depends on it, look it up for yourself. Alright, that's the end of what is prehistoric. Prehistoric, to me, doesn't exist. Actually, it's an offense to say something's prehistoric. So, I hope you like this river. I do. Don't jump in it. It's deadly. And we're going to be... thanks for episode 2. Part 2 of episode 1. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about viruses, and I'll try to piece together some other things that I found out. But anyway, thank you. Bye.